A man in his 40s, his face etched with the lines of time, pushed open the door of one of the city's most luxurious restaurants. His coat was frayed at the shoulders, his leather shoes cracked, his shirt faded. All of it made him look like a man struggling to get by. No one, not even the staff who had just bowed to a VIP guest seconds earlier, recognized the truth. He was the owner of the Cole Group, a self-made millionaire CEO, once hailed by the press as the titan of the service industry. His name was Ethan Cole, the man who had built a hotel and restaurant empire, spanning the country from nothing. The man who had been invited to speak at international conferences, whose face had graced the covers of business magazines. But today, as he walked into a place he himself owned, he was seen as someone who didn't belong. The hostess looked up, her eyes scanning him from head to toe. Her brief glance was enough to convey a deep-seated contempt. A man like this had no place here. Her smile faded, replaced by a cold tone. "Excuse me, do you have a reservation?" Ethan shook his head slightly. "Number just one, for tonight." In an instant, the hostess's expression changed. A solo diner, dressed shabbily, with no reservation, it all added up to one assumption: not worth her time. She glanced out at the dining room, a sea of tailored suits and evening gowns. Then she turned back, her voice laced with forced patience. "We're almost fully booked, but if you'd like, there is one table, near the kitchen entrance. Would you like to sit there for now?" The words were polite, but each one landed like an insult. Ethan nodded. He didn't argue. He was used to being judged by his appearance when he walked the streets as an ordinary man. He made his way through the dining room, each step like pushing through a barrier of stairs. Guests paused their conversations as he passed. A man in a tuxedo frowned and whispered to his friend. "Looks like he wandered in from the train station." A sharp, short laugh followed, heavying the air. Ethan reached the smallest table, tucked away next to the swinging doors of the kitchen. Every time a staff member pushed through, the doors would slam with a dry, harsh thud. The smell of smoke, grease, and the sound of shouting from the kitchen spilled out, mixing with the expensive perfumes of the restaurant. No one wanted to sit there, but it was the table Ethan had been graciously offered. The irony was staggering. Every crystal chandelier, every floral arrangement, every dish served here was part of the corporation he owned. But right now, he was just a cheap customer in the eyes of others. If you have ever walked into a place that you were a part of, that you had helped build, only to be pushed into a corner and treated as if you had no right to exist, you will understand what Ethan was feeling. If you have ever been misjudged because of your appearance, please leave a comment. Maybe your experience will give strength to someone watching this. Seated, Ethan noticed the fake smiles all around him. A waiter bowed to a wealthy customer, his back bent so low it was almost folded in half. The restaurant manager, Victor, was laughing boisterously with a group of powerful regulars. But the moment he turned away, his face would go cold, his voice sharp and scolding. A young employee accidentally dropped a napkin and was immediately shooed away like an embarrassment. In this calculated atmosphere, Ethan felt it more clearly than ever. He, the once indispensable man in this corporation, was now neutralized in his own creation. He had become a stranger, pushed out of the glamorous picture that people still used his name to promote. Just then, a waitress approached. Unlike the other tense faces, she looked tired, her eyes dark-ringed but not cold. "Her name tag," read Anna. "Hello, sir. I'll be your server tonight. What can I get you to start?" Her voice was soft, not dismissive, not judgmental. Ethan glanced at her and then ordered, "A glass of water." Anna nodded, without a hint of contempt. The way she placed the glass down was also calm, with no extra, sarcastic flourish. But Ethan noticed her hand was trembling slightly. Something heavy was weighing on this young woman. "I've entered a question. You seem tired. Is everything all right?" Anna flinched and looked down. "No, it's just been a long day." It was a safe answer. But her downcast eyes, the slight catch in her voice, they said something else. Ethan didn't press, just sat and observed. From a nearby table, the whispers started again. I don't understand why they let people like that in. What if he can't even afford his meal? A burst of laughter followed, making a passing waiter frown. Ethan heard it all. He remained silent, but inside, a sense of injustice was building. He had thought for so long that he understood this society. But sitting here, he saw it clearly. Just by changing his coat, his shoes, he had gone from an owner to an object of scorn. Have you ever experienced that? Being judged in an instant, being left out of every conversation just because people think you're not worthy. If you have, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. This is a place where stories like this are shared, to remind us that no one deserves to be pushed to the side just because of their appearance. Anna returned and placed the menu on the table. Her movements were quick, efficient, but then, surprisingly, she left a small, folded piece of paper under the tray. No words, no direct glance, just a slight tremor in her fingers. Ethan watched her as she walked away. Around him, the chatter and the clinking of silverware continued, as if nothing special had happened. But that piece of paper was burning in his hand, waiting to be opened. He slowly picked it up and unfolded it under the dim light. The handwriting was rushed, uneven, just 3 words, but each one struck his eyes with the coldness of a blade. On the hastily folded piece of paper, just 3 words were visible. They are poisoning. Ethan froze. His heart pounded. In an instant, all the surrounding sounds, the piano music, the clatter of silverware, the laughter faded away. All that was left were those 3 scrawled words, like a knife cutting deep into his trust. Who was poisoning? Poisoning what? And why send this to him? A stranger, a poor man. He looked up and saw Anna hurriedly serving another table. She avoided his gaze, but her trembling hands and rushed demeanor gave her away. She wanted to tell him something, but she couldn't say it out loud. A flood of questions rose in Ethan's mind. He had run this corporation for years, confident that he had every report, every number in his grasp. But were those polished figures hiding something dirty? He clutched the note and slipped it into his pocket. Tonight, he had come here to test people's character. He never expected to stumble upon a secret. In the distance, Victor, the restaurant manager, was still laughing loudly with the VIP guests. His eyes gleamed with sycophancy, but when he turned to his staff, his expression changed instantly, cold, sharp, and cruel. About half an hour later, while Ethan was pretending to be engrossed in his water, he saw Victor call Anna into a dark corner near the bar. His face was grim, his smile gone. His voice was low, but the heavy words reached Ethan's ears. What do you think you're doing? I've told you 100 times, don't let cheap customers like that order expensive items. Do you not understand? Or are you pretending not to? Anna lowered her head and mumbled, I was just doing my job. He ordered, I can't just refuse. Victor gritted his teeth. Doing your job? Or are you trying to ruin this place? Listen to me. If that table can't pay, I'm taking it out of your salary. And don't forget, you still have last month's debt to me. He held out his hand and tapped a thin file. Anna's face went pale. Ethan could see her shoulders trembling. He couldn't hear everything Victor whispered after that, but his gestures, his contemptuous chin-jut, were enough for him to understand. Victor had something on her, and was using it to crush the young woman. In the eyes of the wealthy guests, Victor was a great manager, enthusiastic, funny, and attentive. But the moment their backs were turned, he became someone else, a tyrant, a bully, who took pleasure in his employees' fear. Ethan sat in silence, his hand gripping the water glass. He thought he knew his junior staff, but now, this scene was playing out right in front of him. the raw truth of what was happening beneath the glamorous surface. He remembered the look in Anna's eyes when she had placed the water glass down, tired, worried, but still respectful. He remembered the trembling note. It was no longer a coincidence. Ethan clenched his teeth. He had been so proud that his corporation provided jobs for thousands of people. But right before his eyes, a young woman was being broken by that very system. A group of guests walked past his table, their eyes glancing at him as if he were an obstacle. One of them smirked. "It's really a shame. They should have better control over their clientele. Sitting near the kitchen entrance just looks awful." Ethan took a deep breath. He didn't respond. But inside, a fire had been lit. He wasn't angry because he had been insulted. He was angry because he saw the truth so clearly. This society, and even the place he had built, had grown accustomed to dividing people into classes. The rich were served with devotion. The poor were treated as invisible. And worse, beneath that fake exterior, there was a dark secret. "They are poisoning." Ethan turned to look at Victor. He was still smiling obsequiously at a wealthy guest, his mouth spewing polished words. But in his eyes, there was only calculation and greed. The sight sent a chill down Ethan's spine. If you have ever been forced to stay silent in the face of injustice, ever had to pretend not to see just to keep your job, you will understand Anna's pain. You can share your story in the comments. Maybe your words will give someone else the courage in a similar situation. Ethan didn't take his eyes off Anna. After being berated by Victor, she returned to her work. Her smile strained, her eyes filled with fear. She didn't dare to make eye contact with him. Her steps were hurried, her worn-out shoes making a soft, trembling sound on the floor. He saw it clearly. Behind that fear was an untold story. A story of poverty, of family burdens, and of a trap with no escape. Ethan clutched the note in his pocket. It was no longer just suspicion. It was an urge. He had to know the truth. He never imagined that tonight, during a seemingly meaningless meal, would be the beginning of a great storm, not just for his corporation, but for the life of the young woman named Anna. As Victor returned to his fawning performance for the VIP guests, Anna retreated into the shadows. She continued to work like a machine, pouring wine, clearing plates, smiling. But her red-rimmed eyes and trembling hands betrayed everything. Ethan watched, his heart heavy. How long had it been since he had seen a simple truth in someone's eyes? For years, he had been surrounded by calculated smiles, handshakes that were merely exchanges of favors, and empty flattery. And tonight, in the tired eyes of an ordinary waitress, he saw something that millions of dollars couldn't buy: real fear. He remembered the 3 words on the note. They are poisoning. Poisoning not just with food, but by suffocating people, turning them into silent tools. The water in front of him had long since gone lukewarm. The ice melted, but Ethan hadn't touched it. His mind was flooded with distant memories. When he was 13, he had stood outside the door of a fancy restaurant, peering through the glass. Inside, the lights were bright, the tables set, the people in their fine clothes, and he, in his ragged clothes, was waiting for his mother to finish her shift at the factory with a box of cold leftovers. Back then, he had sworn to himself, "One day, I will walk into places like this, not as an outsider," and he had done it. But now, sitting in a restaurant that bore the name of his own corporation, he was once again pushed into the worst corner, looked down upon as a charity case. It turned out that injustice doesn't disappear just because you get rich. Injustice exists in the way people see each other. Anna's eyes were like a mirror, reflecting his own past back at him. He saw himself from years ago, lost, powerless, his fate decided by others. That young woman was struggling to survive. Every forced smile, every fearful nod, was to keep the small income that supported her family. Ethan had overheard Victor's threat, some kind of debt, and from her exhausted appearance, he understood. It wasn't just about money. but about the life of someone she was carrying on her shoulders. When dinner was over, Ethan stood up. He left the restaurant to the indifferent glances of the hostess. No one bothered to say goodbye. The door closed behind him, leaving the sound of piano music and fake laughter inside. Outside, the night wind blew through the noisy street. He walked, without a destination, the note in his pocket like a heavy stone, weighing him down. They are poisoning. 3 words, but they were enough to turn his world upside down. That entire night, Ethan didn't sleep. He sat in his high-rise apartment, looking down at the city. From above, the rows of brightly lit buildings were magnificent, but to him, it was all just a glossy veneer, hiding the trembling lives of people below. He thought of Anna, her pale face, her strained smile, her desperate eyes. That girl was probably sitting in a cramped room somewhere, counting her tips, worrying about a sick relative in the hospital. Meanwhile, Victor was still raising a glass with the wealthy elite, enjoying the profits from that very exploitation. The pent-up emotions in Ethan turned into a cold resolve. He had built an entire corporation from nothing. He understood that true power wasn't in the numbers on a report, but in how a person dares to face the truth. He knew that if he looked away, everything would continue as it was. Anna would be pushed to her limit, the warning would be buried, and that poisoning, whatever it meant, would continue. Ethan clenched his fists. Tonight, he had seen enough. He couldn't just walk away like a stranger. This was his empire, his reputation, and above all, it was the lives of innocent people. His expression hardened. From empathy, it had now turned into a determination to act. He was no longer the poor man who had wandered in an old suit. He was Ethan Cole, the owner, the CEO, the self-made millionaire, and he was going to bring it all to light. After a sleepless night, Ethan knew he couldn't wait. As the sun was just beginning to rise over the city, he called Daniel, his longtime friend and the COO of his corporation. Daniel's voice on the other end was full of concern. "Ethan, you sound strange. What's wrong?" Ethan looked down at the crumpled note on his desk. "They are poisoning. Daniel, I need the truth. Last night at our own restaurant, I saw something I couldn't believe. Employees are being pushed to their breaking point. The manager is threatening them. And more importantly, there are signs that someone is hiding some dirty business in our supply chain." There was a moment of silence on the other end. Then Daniel replied slowly, "Do you have any proof?" "Not yet," Ethan said, his voice firm. "But I will." He knew Daniel was loyal, but he was also practical. Only when he saw proof would he fully stand by his side. And to get that proof, Ethan had to go in himself. That afternoon, Ethan went back to the restaurant. This time, he wasn't wearing a fancy suit. The same old coat, the same cracked shoes. He wanted to remain invisible, to observe. From his corner table by the kitchen, he watched silently. Victor was talking to 2 strange men at the bar. Their voices were low, their attitude urgent. Ethan couldn't hear every word, but he caught a glimpse of a thick file and some wire transfer receipts. Victor's eyes gleamed as he took a stack of cash from an envelope. He quickly hid it and then turned to greet a regular customer with a sociable smile. The seamless transition was chilling. At that moment, Anna passed by, her head down, avoiding them. Just a single glare from Victor made her flinch. Ethan saw her hand grip the tray, the veins standing out. He decided he couldn't just sit and watch. That evening, after the last of the customers had thinned out, Ethan slowly walked toward the employee office area. He knew the place he had signed off on the restaurant's design plans himself. The wooden door was closed, a sliver of light seeping from underneath. He could hear Victor's soft laughter, the rustling of papers. He waited until he heard his footsteps recede. Then he approached. The doorknob was cold. It was locked. But as the owner, he knew how to get in. The master key, the one he always carried for all his properties. The door opened with a soft click. Inside was a small, almost too neat room. But that very neatness revealed something. On the desk was a black leather-bound ledger, the corners of the pages worn, something Victor clearly didn't want anyone to touch. Ethan opened it. The pages were filled with dense handwriting, crowded with numbers, but one page immediately made his blood run cold. A list of inventory from a supplier that had been shut down for health code violations. There were cryptic symbols, huge discrepancies in the costs. He kept flipping. The more pages he turned, the clearer the truth became. It wasn't just this restaurant. Several other branches were also receiving supplies from this tainted source. Victor was in collusion with outsiders, buying cheap, selling high, and pocketing the profits. And most importantly, the customers were being poisoned every day. Ethan closed the ledger, his face as cold as ice. His heart was pounding in his chest. But on the surface, the composure of a CEO returned. He had the truth. The sound of shoes echoed in the hallway. Ethan quickly put the ledger back and left the room. The door clicked shut, just as Victor approached. Through a crack in the wall, he saw Victor take a drag from a cigarette, his suspicious eyes scanning the area. He sensed something was wrong, but not enough to know who had just touched his secret. Ethan left the restaurant and blended into the crowd on the street. That night, the city was still bright with lights, but in his eyes, it had all gone dark. He walked away with two parallel feelings, a heart heavy with the betrayal within his own system, and a gaze that was sharp and determined. Now, he wasn't just a witness. He was the one holding the proof. And a confrontation with Victor was no longer a choice. It was an inevitability. The next afternoon, the restaurant was buzzing with preparations for the dinner service. The staff hurried to set the tables, polish the glasses, and arrange the napkins. Victor, in his tailored suit, walked through the dining room, a forced smile on his face. He thought he was in control, that his secret was safe in the leather-bound ledger. But then the main doors opened. It wasn't an ordinary customer, nor was it the poor man in the frayed coat from the night before. Standing in the light of the crystal chandeliers was Ethan Cole, the CEO, the owner of the corporation, the self-made millionaire. This time, he wasn't hiding. He wore a perfectly fitted gray suit. His face was sharp and cold, his gaze direct. The entire hall went silent. The staff was stunned, the customers surprised. Victor froze for a few seconds, then quickly put on a smile. "Mr. Cole, what an honor to have you visit. Why didn't you let us know you were coming? We would have prepared something special." Ethan didn't answer. He walked straight in and stopped at the small table by the kitchen, the very spot he had been pushed to the night before. He placed his hand on the table and tapped it once. In the silence, the sound was like the strike of a gavel. He spoke, his voice calm, but as sharp as a blade. "I sat here last night, and from this spot, I saw enough to understand how rotten this place has become." Victor broke into a sweat, trying to remain calm. "Sir, what do you mean?" "There must be a misunderstanding." Ethan cut him off, his eyes never leaving him. "A misunderstanding? Do you think I don't know what I just read in your leather-bound ledger?" The color drained from Victor's face. Around them, the staff began to whisper. Ethan raised a hand, and at that moment, Daniel and two men in suits walked in. One of them pulled out a badge. "Federal investigator." Ethan looked directly at Victor, his voice as cold as ice. "The evidence is all here. You've been buying tainted supplies from a closed-down facility, poisoning your customers, and pocketing the profits. You fabricated a debt to force this female employee into silence. Did you think I wouldn't find out?" Anna stood frozen by the counter, her face pale. When Ethan mentioned her, she flinched, her eyes wide with fear. Ethan turned to her, his voice softening. "Anna, come here." She hesitated, then took a few trembling steps forward. Ethan looked at her and gave a small nod. "Tell everyone." "What did he do to you?" A tear rolled down her cheek. Anna choked out, He forced me to take on a fake debt. He threatened to fire me if I didn't pay it. I needed the money for my brother's medical bills. He made me help him cover up the books, or else he would cut my pay. I was so scared, but I had no other choice. A wave of murmurs swept through the hall. A few customers shook their heads. Others gasped in outrage. Victor tried to fight back, shouting, "She's lying. She's a traitor, making things up to save herself." But just then, Daniel held up a tablet, displaying a full copy of the ledger, the receipts, and an audio recording of Victor's threats. His voice on the recording was unmistakable. "If you open your mouth, don't expect to live peacefully with that debt and your sick little brother." Everything went silent. There was no denying it. Ethan stepped closer and looked down at Victor. His voice was low but sharp. "You forgot one thing. Here, I'm the one who makes the decisions, and I will never tolerate anyone who profits from the pain of others." The investigators stepped forward and handcuffed Victor. He screamed and thrashed, but no one paid him any attention. The employees who had once been so afraid now watched with relief. Ethan turned back, his eyes finding Anna. She was trembling, her eyes blurred with tears. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice firm. "From now on, there is no debt. Your brother will be treated with the corporation's medical fund, and you will no longer have to be afraid. I need someone with the courage to stand up for the truth. Are you willing to work directly with me?" Anna burst into tears. Her reply was choked but clear. "Yes, I am." Applause broke out, at first hesitant, then spreading through the hall. The staff, the customers, everyone felt a sense of release. Ethan stood in the middle of it all, not smiling, just nodding. In his eyes, the coldness had given way to a sliver of warmth. He knew the battle wasn't over, but at least today, justice had been served in the very place it had been trampled. After Victor was led away, the atmosphere in the restaurant was still tense, but this time, it wasn't the cold fakeness from before. It was a mixture of shock and relief. The employees, who had always kept their heads down, were now whispering to each other, a few secretly wiping away tears. Anna stood there, her small shoulders still trembling. For the first time in months, she no longer had to live in constant fear. Ethan looked at her, and in his eyes, he saw the image of the poor boy he had once been pushed to the outside of a glittering world. He turned to Daniel. "Take care of all her brother's medical bills, starting today." Daniel nodded firmly. "Consider it done." Anna burst into tears, her hands covering her face. These were no longer tears of despair. They were tears of liberation. Ethan handed her a handkerchief. "You don't have to beg anyone anymore. From now on, you just need to focus on living and working with integrity. I'll take care of the rest." The room stirred. A few customers came up to shake Ethan's hand. One of them said quietly, "Thank you for doing what so many are afraid to do." Ethan gave a slight nod. He didn't smile, but a sense of relief washed over him. Last night, he had walked into this place as an invisible man. Today, he stood here, not just as an owner, but as a man who had just rediscovered the true meaning of power. On his way out of the restaurant, Ethan paused at the small table by the kitchen, the one where he had been shunned. He looked at it for a long moment. Amidst the noise of dinner preparations, the images from last night returned, the contemptuous glances, the mocking laughter, the smell of kitchen smoke, and on this very table, Anna had left a small, folded note, a seemingly worthless piece of paper, but it had brought down an entire wall of lies. He gently touched the chair, ran his hand over the tabletop, and then turned away. No more words were needed. That night, in his high-rise office, Ethan sat alone. The city lights glittered outside the glass window. But this time, he didn't feel as lonely as before. He thought of Anna and her brother. He thought of the employees who had breathed a sigh of relief when Victor was arrested. He thought of the customers who placed their trust in every meal. He realized that for so many years, he had thought his value lay in the skyscrapers he owned, in the numbers on his reports. But in reality, his value lay in how he used that power to protect the small, vulnerable people. Ethan raised a glass of water, a voice in his head clear and strong. Money can't buy respect. But if you use it right, it can bring back justice. The next day, the Cole Group issued an official statement. The entire restaurant chain would be audited, the supply chain tightened, and a medical fund for employees established. The head of that fund was none other than Anna, now the director of ethical oversight, reporting directly to Ethan. The image of the small, timid woman from before, now sitting in a boardroom, her expression determined, made Ethan believe he had made the right choice. And behind her, a thin teenage boy, Anna's brother, was smiling weakly in a hospital bed, receiving full treatment. The story ends there, but its echo remained in everyone's hearts. A self-made millionaire CEO who walked into his own restaurant in an old suit and was treated like a nobody. A tired waitress who bravely sent a 3-word message on a trembling piece of paper. And from that moment, an entire system of deceit collapsed. Ethan knew there would be more challenges ahead. But he also knew that as long as there were people like Anna, justice still had a chance to exist. He stood by the window, looking out at the brightly lit city, and whispered a short sentence, one that would be etched in the memory of anyone who heard it. Sometimes, a trembling piece of paper is heavier than $1 billion empire.